Have you ever sat alone in the quiet of your room, staring at the ceiling, wondering why your life isn't where you thought it would be? You look around and it seems like everyone else is moving forward, getting promotions, buying houses, finding love, living the life you secretly wish you had. Meanwhile, you feel stuck, battling the same old struggles, questioning your worth, and wondering if you're even making a difference. I get it. We've all been there, feeling like we're falling behind or just not good enough. But what if I told you that you're actually doing better than you think you are? Yes, you heard me right. What if all those silent battles you're fighting, the relentless effort you're putting in just to get through each day, are actually signs of strength and growth? What if the very things you're beating yourself up over are proof that you're on the right path? You see, the enemy loves to whisper lies of inadequacy and failure. He wants you to believe that your worth is tied to your achievements, your status, or how you measure up to others. But let me remind you, God doesn't see you that way. He sees your heart, your perseverance, your faith, even when it's the size of a mustard seed. He sees you trying, even when you feel like you're failing, and He's cheering you on. Sometimes we're so focused on what we haven't accomplished that we fail to see how far we've come. We overlook the growth, the changes, and the resilience that only comes from walking through the fire. But today, we're going to shift that perspective. Today, I want to show you 7 powerful signs that you're doing better than you think you are. Signs that God is moving in your life, even when it feels like nothing's happening. This isn't about empty platitudes or feel-good cliches. This is about seeing yourself through God's eyes, recognizing the progress you've made, and finding hope in the journey you're on. Because the truth is, if you're still standing, if you're still fighting, still believing, still praying, you're doing better than you think. So before you give in to that nagging voice telling you that you're not enough, let's take a closer look at your life. Let's uncover the victories hidden in your struggles, the strength found in your perseverance, and the grace that's been carrying you all along. By the end of this journey, my prayer is that you'll see yourself not just as you are, but as God sees you, chosen, beloved, and so much stronger than you realize. Are you ready to see the truth behind the lies? Then let's get started. Number 1, you're not who you used to be. Think about it for a moment. Who were you a year ago? 5 years ago? It's so easy to look at our lives and only see what's missing, what's broken, or what's not working out the way we planned. But have you stopped to notice the growth, the changes, the quiet victories that you've already achieved? Sometimes the most profound transformations happen so gradually that we don't even realize they're happening. But they're there, proof that God is working in you, even when you can't see it. You're not who you used to be, and that's worth celebrating. Maybe you don't get angry as quickly as you used to. Perhaps you've learned to set boundaries and protect your peace. Maybe you're learning to forgive, not just others, but yourself. These changes might seem small, but they're significant. They're the evidence of God's hand shaping you, molding you, and making you more like Him. 2 Corinthians 5:17 tells us, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." But here's the thing. Becoming a new creation isn't a one-time event. It's a process, a journey of daily surrender and transformation. And it doesn't always feel glamorous. In fact, it can be downright messy. Growth often looks like struggle. Change often feels like discomfort. But that's because you're shedding the old to make room for the new. Look at Paul. He was once Saul, a man known for persecuting Christians. By all worldly standards, he was a lost cause. But God saw who he could become, not just who he was. When Paul encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus, everything changed. Did his past disappear? No. Did his challenges end? Absolutely not. But his identity was transformed, and his purpose was revealed. Maybe you're not preaching to thousands or writing letters that will change the world, but that doesn't mean you're not transforming. Your story is still being written, and your growth is proof that God isn't done with you yet. Every small step, every tiny act of faith, every lesson learned, it all counts. You're becoming more compassionate, more resilient, more faithful. You're learning to trust God in deeper ways, and that kind of growth is priceless. So before you criticize yourself for not being where you want to be, take a moment to acknowledge how far you've come. Remember the prayers you prayed that God answered, the storms you survived, the mountains you climbed. You're not who you used to be, and that's a powerful sign that you're doing better than you think. You're growing, you're changing, and God is right there with you, guiding every step. Number 2, you have a desire for more. Have you ever felt that restless longing in your heart, that ache for something more? Maybe it's a dream you can't shake, a calling you can't ignore, or a sense of purpose that keeps tugging at you. That desire for more isn't a sign of failure or discontentment. It's a sign of growth. It's God's way of stirring your spirit, calling you to step into the next chapter of your story. Philippians 3:13-14 says, "Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus." That holy dissatisfaction, that yearning for more, is proof that you're not complacent. It's a sign that you're pressing forward, growing and evolving into who God has created you to be. But let's be real. Desiring more can be frustrating. It can make you feel like you're ungrateful, or like nothing is ever enough. But that's not what this is about. This isn't about chasing after worldly success or comparing your journey to someone else's. This is about recognizing that God has planted dreams and purposes within you that are meant to grow. It's about understanding that feeling unfulfilled is often God's way of moving you out of your comfort zone and into your calling. Think about Moses. He grew up in the palace with every privilege imaginable, but he never felt at home there. There was always a restlessness inside him, a longing for more than just comfort and luxury. That desire eventually led him to leave the palace and discover his true purpose as the deliverer of God's people. His dissatisfaction wasn't a sign of failure, it was a sign of destiny. Maybe you're feeling that same restlessness. Maybe you're in a season where everything seems stagnant, where the things that once brought you joy now feel empty. Don't ignore that feeling. Lean into it. Pray about it. Ask God what He's calling you to next. Because that desire for more is a sign that God is preparing you for something greater. If you're feeling stuck, remember that the discomfort is temporary, but the growth is eternal. You're being stretched, challenged, and refined for a purpose that's bigger than you can imagine. It's okay to feel unsettled. It's okay to want more, as long as you're pursuing God's will above all else. So, don't be afraid to dream. Don't be afraid to hope for more, to pray for bigger things, to believe that God isn't finished with you yet. That desire isn't a curse, it's a calling, and it's one of the most powerful signs that you're doing better than you think. You're not stagnant. You're not stuck. You're simply in transition, moving closer to the purpose God has for you. If you're still hungry for more of God, more purpose, more meaning, then you're already winning a battle that most people don't even realize they're fighting. That longing is a sign of life, a sign of growth, a sign that God is working in you and through you. So keep seeking, keep dreaming. Keep pressing on. You're doing better than you think. Number 3, you're still fighting battles. Let's be honest. Life is hard. Some days it feels like you're fighting just to breathe, to get out of bed, to keep going when everything inside you wants to quit. And when you're in the thick of the battle, it's easy to feel defeated, broken, or weak. But here's the truth. The fact that you're still fighting means you haven't been defeated. It means you're stronger than you think. You see, struggle is proof of growth. If you weren't moving forward, there wouldn't be any resistance. The enemy wouldn't bother attacking you if you weren't a threat to his plans. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Your battles are evidence that you're on the right path. They're signs that God is working in your life, and the enemy is trying to stop you. Think about it. Every hero in the Bible faced battles. David fought Goliath. Daniel faced the lions. Esther confronted a king to save her people. Even Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. The battles weren't signs of weakness. They were evidence of purpose. They were opportunities to prove God's power and faithfulness. And just like them, your struggles are setting the stage for God's victory in your life. Maybe you're fighting battles that no one else knows about. Silent wars in your mind, struggles with fear, anxiety, or depression. Maybe you're battling addiction, doubt, or insecurity. Whatever it is, the fact that you're still in the fight means you haven't given up. It means you still have hope. It means God's grace is sustaining you, even when you feel like you're falling apart. The world may see your battles as weakness, but God sees them as strength. Because every time you get back up, every time you pray through the pain, every time you refuse to give in to despair, you're proving that His power is made perfect in your weakness. You're living out 2 Corinthians 12:9, which says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Don't let the enemy convince you that struggling means you're losing. The fact that you're still fighting means you're winning. It means you're pushing back against the darkness, refusing to let it consume you. It means your faith is stronger than your fear. Your hope is bigger than your pain, and your spirit is more resilient than you realize. Look at Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family, yet he never cursed God. He questioned, he mourned, he struggled, but he never gave up his faith. In the end, God restored him double for his trouble, proving that the battles you fight today are preparing you for the blessings of tomorrow. So don't despise the struggle. Don't be ashamed of the battles you're fighting. They're proof that you're not defeated, that you're not giving up, that you're still standing. And that, my friend, is a powerful sign that you're doing better than you think. You're a warrior, and God is fighting for you. Keep pushing through. Victory is on the other side. Number 4, you're surrounded by God's grace. Let's pause for a moment and take a deep breath. You're here. You're breathing. Your heart is beating. And that alone is evidence of God's grace. Sometimes we get so caught up in what we don't have or what's not going right that we forget to recognize the simple yet powerful signs of grace all around us. If you're still standing, still fighting, still believing, that's grace carrying you through. Lamentations 3:22-23 says, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." Think about that. New mercies every morning. Not just when you feel holy, not just when you get it right, but every single morning. God's grace is constant, unwavering, and undeserved. And it's proof that you're doing better than you think, because you're never doing it alone. Maybe you don't realize it, but grace has been sustaining you all along. It was grace that woke you up this morning. It was grace that gave you the strength to keep going when you wanted to quit. It was grace that protected you from dangers you didn't even see. Every time you made it through a day you thought would break you, that was God's grace holding you together. Look at Peter. He was bold, passionate, and full of faith, but he was also impulsive, flawed, and fearful. He denied Jesus 3 times, and in that moment he felt like a complete failure. But Jesus didn't define Peter by his mistakes. Instead, he restored him with grace and gave him a purpose bigger than his past. Peter went on to preach to thousands, leading countless people to Christ. That's what grace does. It redeems, restores, and redefines. The same grace that restored Peter is available to you today. It's the kind of grace that doesn't keep a record of wrongs, that covers you even when you fall short. It's the grace that sees beyond your failures to the potential God placed inside you. And if you're still breathing, that means God's not finished with you yet. His grace is proof that your story isn't over. Think about all the times God's grace showed up in your life. Maybe it was a door that opened when you least expected it, a friend who showed up just when you needed them, or peace that didn't make sense in the middle of a storm. Those weren't coincidences. They were reminders that God is with you, fighting for you, and carrying you through. It's easy to overlook grace because it's often quiet and subtle. It doesn't always feel miraculous or spectacular. Sometimes it looks like getting through another day. Sometimes it looks like the strength to pray when you're hurting. Sometimes it's simply the courage to hope again. But don't take it for granted, because grace is evidence of God's love and faithfulness in your life. So the next time you feel overwhelmed or unworthy, remember that you're surrounded by God's grace. It's not something you earn, it's a gift. And if God's grace is still covering you, that means He's not giving up on you. That means you're doing better than you think, because you're not walking this journey alone. His grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in your weakness, and His faithfulness is greater than your failures. If nothing else, let this truth sink in. God's grace is proof that you're still in His hands, still part of His plan, and still moving forward, even when you don't feel like it. So, keep going. You're doing better than you think, because God's grace is carrying you every step of the way. Number 5, you're making an impact, even if you don't see it. Have you ever felt like nothing you do really matters? Like you're just going through the motions, invisible, unnoticed, and unimportant. If so, you're not alone. But I need you to hear this. You're making an impact, even if you don't see it. Your life is influencing others in ways you may never fully understand. And your faithfulness is planting seeds that God will water in His perfect time. Jesus said in Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden." Notice that He didn't say you could be the light, or that you might become the light someday. He said you are the light, right here, right now. In the middle of your messy, imperfect, ordinary life, you are shining in ways that you can't always see. And just because you don't see the impact doesn't mean it's not happening. Think about Ruth. She was a widow in a foreign land, struggling to survive, picking up scraps in the fields just to make it through another day. By all worldly standards, she was insignificant. But her faithfulness, humility, and loyalty to Naomi were impacting more than just her immediate circumstances. Her obedience to God's calling placed her in the lineage of Jesus Christ. She didn't see the full picture. She didn't know the legacy she was creating. But God did, and He was using her faithfulness to fulfill His divine purpose. Maybe you're not standing on a platform preaching to thousands. Maybe you're not leading worship or writing books, but your quiet faithfulness matters. Every kind word, every prayer, every moment of encouragement, it all counts. You're making a difference in your family, in your workplace, in your community, even if you never get a thank you or a round of applause. Your light is shining, and it's brighter than you think. You never know who's watching, who's inspired by your perseverance, who's impacted by your kindness. Maybe it's your children, seeing your faith in action. Maybe it's a coworker, witnessing your integrity. Maybe it's a friend who's drawn closer to God because of your prayers. The ripple effects of your faithfulness are reaching farther than you can imagine, and God is using you in ways you may never fully see on this side of eternity. Look at Joseph. He spent years in slavery and prison, falsely accused and forgotten. It seemed like his life was going nowhere, but his faithfulness to God was influencing everyone around him. Potiphar, the prison warden, and eventually Pharaoh himself. Joseph's obedience not only saved his family, but an entire nation. At the time, he couldn't see the impact he was making, but God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail for a purpose greater than Joseph could have dreamed. You may feel unseen, overlooked, or insignificant, but God sees you. He sees every sacrifice, every tear, every act of obedience, and nothing you do for Him is ever wasted. Galatians 6:9 encourages us, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Your impact may not be visible right now, but that doesn't mean it's not powerful. Keep shining even when it feels pointless. Keep loving, even when it's hard. Keep serving, even when it's unnoticed. Because you're making an impact, and God is using your life to touch others in ways you may never see. You're doing better than you think, because you're living out your faith, one step at a time. And that's a legacy that will outlast you. Number 6, you're still seeking God. This one is so important. If you're still seeking God, still hungry for His presence, still praying, still reading His Word, even when it feels like He's silent, then you're doing better than you think. The very fact that you haven't given up on your relationship with God is proof that He hasn't given up on you. Jesus said in Matthew 5:6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." If you're still longing for God, still wrestling with questions, still pressing into His promises, then that's evidence of the Holy Spirit working in you. It means your faith is alive, even if it feels weak. It means God is drawing you closer, refining you, teaching you to depend on Him. Sometimes we mistake doubt for defeat. We think that struggling in our faith means we're failing. But the opposite is true. The very fact that you're struggling shows that you care, that you're fighting to believe. that you're reaching out for God even when it feels like He's far away. That's not failure. That's faith. Look at David. He was called a man after God's own heart, yet his life was full of struggles, doubts, and questions. Just read the Psalms. One moment he's praising God with all his might, and the next he's crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" David's life was messy, complicated, and far from perfect, but he never stopped seeking God. Even in his darkest moments, he poured out his heart to the Lord, and God never turned him away. If you're still seeking God, then you're in good company. You're following in the footsteps of Abraham, who believed God's promises even when they seemed impossible. You're walking alongside Moses, who sought God's presence in the wilderness. You're running with Elijah, who called down fire from heaven, yet struggled with fear and discouragement. And you're echoing the cries of Jesus, who in his darkest moment prayed, "Father, not my will, but yours be done." Maybe your prayers feel empty. Maybe you're not hearing God's voice the way you used to. Maybe you're wrestling with doubts that scare you. But the fact that you're still praying, still reaching out, still hoping, that's faith. Hebrews 11:6 says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." You're seeking, and God sees you. He hears you. And he promises to reward your pursuit. Don't let the enemy convince you that your doubts disqualify you. They don't. Your questions don't scare God. Your struggles don't push him away. In fact, they draw you closer to him, because they make you realize how desperately you need him. If you're still seeking, then you're still growing. If you're still praying, then you're still believing. And that's a powerful sign that you're doing better than you think. So keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking. Even when it's hard, even when it feels dry, even when it doesn't make sense, keep going. Because the God who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He's not finished with you yet, and your pursuit of him is proof that his Spirit is alive and active in your life. If you're still seeking God, then you're not lost. You're on a journey, and every step, every prayer, every tear is bringing you closer to him. You're doing better than you think, because you haven't let go of your faith. And that's the kind of faith that moves mountains. Number 7, you're doing better than you think. Take a deep breath and let this truth sink in. You're doing better than you think you are. I know it doesn't always feel that way. I know that life can be overwhelming, that the struggles are real, and that the pain can be heavy. But the fact that you're still here, still standing, still trying, is proof that you're stronger than you realize and more loved than you could ever imagine. Think about the journey we've just walked through together. You haven't given up, even on the hardest days, and that's courage. You're not who you used to be, and that's growth. You have a desire for more, and that's purpose. You're still fighting battles, and that's resilience. You're surrounded by God's grace, and that's love. You're making an impact, even when you don't see it, and that's influence. And most importantly, you're still seeking God, and that's faith. Do you see it now? Do you see how God is at work in your life? Even in the moments when it feels like nothing is happening. He's moving in the unseen, working all things together for your good, even when it's hard to believe. You're not behind. You're not failing. You're exactly where you need to be because you're in his hands. The enemy wants you to focus on what you're not, on what you haven't achieved, on the mistakes you've made. But God sees who you're becoming. the purpose He's placed inside you, the impact you're making simply by being faithful. And if He's not worried, you don't need to be either. Philippians 1:6 reminds us, being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So what do you do now? Keep going, keep fighting, keep growing. Keep seeking. Don't give up just because the journey is hard. Don't quit just because the progress is slow. Trust that God is doing a work in you, even in the waiting, even in the struggle. You're on the right path, and every step matters, even when you can't see the destination yet. Stop measuring your worth by worldly standards. Stop comparing your journey to someone else's highlight reel. God's plan for you is unique, beautiful, and perfectly timed. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward, trusting that He's guiding you, leading you, and carrying you through. If you're still standing, then God's not finished with you. If you're still breathing, then your story isn't over. And if you're still seeking, then you're exactly where you need to be. You're doing better than you think. So hold your head up high, keep walking by faith, keep trusting God's process. And remember, you're loved, you're chosen, and you're never alone. You're stronger than you realize, and your journey is making an impact that reaches farther than you can see. God's not just writing your story, He's perfecting it. And I promise you this, when it's all said and done, it will be more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. So keep going. You're doing better than you think. And God is with you every step of the way.